Yo, what's going on YouTube? Baka here from Meta World Gaming, coming at you with the new patch 1.4 notes, the Season of Fortune. Now, huge changes for the game. There are a lot of new things going on in this. Big balance changes, huge Masters rework on how the LP works in Masters. There's so much to go over in this, but real quick, as always, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see more videos coming from the boys, as well as check out all the links in the description below. We're going to be coming out with a bunch of patch 1.4 decks. Regularly check our mobalytics. They'll have all of our decks in there, as well as follow us on Twitch. Every night we're live, 7 p.m. to 1 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, let's get into it. Season of Fortune has begun. We'll skip the dev notes here on the card changes, but big news on the Gauntlet we already knew about. New mode. First Gauntlet begins June 26th, a couple days from now, and the Singleton Gauntlet, which is a play one of every card in your deck, joins the rotation on July 3rd. Ranked rewards in new season. Season of Plunder is over, and now, depending on your rank, you get one of these cool icons and the typical reset, and that starts tomorrow, 10 a.m. Pacific time, June 24th. Masters LP update. Now, this is something that the guys on the us on the channel have been looking forward to, as well as so many other high-level master players that have really been looking to grind and actually hit rank 1 before. It was pretty much impossible to grind even with really high win rates, and now with the new LP system, there's going to be a range of 15 to 25 LP gained or lost per game, and then your LP will decide your rank in the ladder. And now what that means is that when you get into Masters, you'll be assigned an LP based off of your MMR, and then every game, depending on how good or bad your opponent was, you'll gain something between 15 and 25 LP, how the normal MMR scaling was. But how the ranks will be decided is just your number of LP. So if I had 1,000 LP, I won a game, and now I have 1,020 LP, let's say, I will go up in rank over everybody now with below 1,020 LP. There could have been 3 people above me on the ladder that had a bit more LP than me, but had less than 1,020, and now I'm a rank ahead of them. So the LP is not the rank, but it is what is the score that will define your rank. That makes sense? So moving forward, we're going to see that a high win percentage guaranteed will be able to push you up to a positive LP change, but other people can also be pushing. So a player that plays way more games could potentially have a slightly lower win rate and then still have a higher LPs. So there's going to be a high factor placed on how many games you play, as well as what your win rate is. Now, let's get into the changes. Darius has gone from 5 health to 6 health on the backside, which makes a lot of sense that this card, it didn't gain health before from the front side to the backside. So now that it has 6, it doesn't actually just trade into those 5/5, so the card doesn't die as easily. Maybe this will help be a bigger payoff. Shouldn't really be much of a change, though. I don't think Darius will find himself being in any decks that he previously wasn't in. Anivia cost from 7 to 6. Now, I do think that this is a substantial change for Anivia and a big buff, but I just don't think that Anivia really fits into any of the Freljord strategies at the moment, and any control strategies. The way to play control in Runeterra right now is heavily dictated by things like Riptide Rex, Ladros, Atrocity, and Karma Ezreal, and the way that those decks kind of pan out. Not the cards individually, but just the style of play for control decks has historically been in Runeterra. Once I achieve the Enlightened turns, I win the game. It's over. So cards like Anivia take a little bit of time to get the ball rolling, and that's just kind of fallen off, and that's not really the best way to be utilizing Freljord. So I don't think this will really be improving its play rate or really doing much for Anivia, but certainly a nice buff, and it's nice that you can curve like an Anivia into a Rekindler, or Anivia have a little more mana open. Maybe you're playing a Mist Call combination, or maybe you can play like Anivia and Chronicler of Ruin on your Enlightened turn now, which is a pretty interesting combo that wasn't available before. So maybe we'll see some decks trying out. I don't think this will be much adding much to the meta here. Braum. Now this, I think, is probably the biggest change that we're going to see in all of the balance changes right now. Braum has gone from 3 mana to a 4 mana card, and has power now. He actually has 1 attack on the front side, which is huge to make it so that this card isn't just such a liability sitting around and doing nothing for so long. And then on top of that, the first time I survive damage, I summon a Mighty Poro. This card has become a 4 mana 1/5 that summons a 3/3 challenger, still has the regeneration, and now the backside, although they've dropped the health off of it, they want to follow suit with the +1/+1, and now it's actually a very viable card on the backside at 2/6 that can actually generate a lot of value over time and not require other cards for this card to be good. The both sides of Braum now are very actively playable without needing another card in combination. Now, I do think that we might see some Braum decks finding their way into the meta. Maybe it's Braum Sejuani, Braum Thresh, and we might see a couple things of this. But it is still, this card is not broken by any means. It's just I think this card is a good playable champion in the upcoming patch. We'll see how this shapes up, though, where the meta goes and what people want to try Braum out with. I also like that it's easy to trigger him with your first point of damage of, cards like Transfusion and Ember Maiden to force the Mighty Poro without even needing to go to combat. It only takes 1 damage, so that's pretty sweet that you can get a pretty reasonable tempo play out of Braum, even without a card on your opponent's board to easily attack into, and potentially get that Mighty Poro to swing that turn, or, just, there's a lot more viable lines of play with Braum now. Jinx's Super Mega Death Rocket has gone from 2 mana to 1 mana. Now, Jinx wasn't seeing a ton of play, but she has a really powerful level up, so I was a little surprised to see that they were buffing it, but it does feel that it was a bit more in line with the fact of you play a Jinx, you turbo her out, you flip her over on turn 4, turn 5, and then the next turn you draw 2 cards, and you have to be able to play those cards out of your hand to go back to 0 to generate the rocket. So the fact that it costed 2, there would be a lot of situations where you just didn't actually, you had the mana to dump your hand and go to 0 and get the rocket, but then you didn't have the mana to actually play the rocket. So it being at 1 should try to solve that problem a little bit and make Jinx a little bit stronger, but pretty minor change. I don't think it's going to do a ton, and I think Jinx's limitations have nothing to do with the rocket. So if she sees play, it'll because Jinx is just good in a deck, but rather than the Super Mega Death Rocket now costing 1, maybe it'll help her out a little bit, though, even at her level upside to be a little more useful. Genevieve Elmhart has gone from a 4/4 to a 5/5. I thought this card was pretty powerful before. It just didn't find a place in the current Demacia decks a lot of time, and Cithria is generally just a better option than this card. But at a 5/5, I think this card is way stronger to be able to actually scoop up cards off the board and live at 1 HP. There's a lot of cards with 4 attack in the meta right now that would be great targets for her to scout attack into and then get an additional attack and then maybe go attack on the 5/5, or also just being able to attack into the 5/5s in the first place, or other cards with 5 HP. It's good to see because Demacia has definitely fallen out. They've nerfed Demacia a lot, and as we can see before I even get into it, another Demacia nerf down there that everybody kind of figured was going to happen. So it's good to see that we're actually seeing a little bit of a buff to the Demacia deck. It's just not really doing much right now, so maybe it'll give it some new direction. They're trying to push for Scout to be a bit more of its own identity rather than just a small synergy package that you throw in a deck. Unyielding Spirit has gone from burst to fast. They clearly realize that they even say toxic gameplay patterns. They understand this card is definitely not great for the new player experience and felt like, against certain decks, this card is just too powerful at burst, at least with fast. Now, a ton of decks actually have answers to be able to get cards off the board. I mean, it was kind of ridiculous that Shadow Isles, the deck that's predicated on how much removal it has, actually just couldn't interact with this card because all their removal didn't really work. Like cards like Vengeance just couldn't even, it just doesn't work. So it's good that there's actually more skill input on this now of knowing when to play this card. There's more counterplay. And maybe, more of the problem was just the card pool. So as the card pool advances and we get more cards that are, in new regions and new cards for existing regions, there'll be more answers for this card. And I think they can just put it back to its original text as long as, there's enough ways to deal with it. And it doesn't just create very polarizing matchups of if I play Unyielding Spirit against X deck, it immediately loses the game. And that's it. And so they just wanted to get rid of that aspect of Runeterra, which I think is definitely much better for new players, as well as the people that are grinding a lot and running into certain matchups like that. Basilisk Rider has gone from a 5/2 to a 5/3. This card before was Allegiance cards are supposed to be a big payoff for, activating them, and they're supposed to be very strong, but this card was completely useless. It was just a terrible card, even when it hit. It was a 6/3, way too easy to kill, and didn't do enough. Now that it's a 6/4, it's actually a lot more resilient because we've seen the difference between 3 and 4, and Runeterra is the big number. 3, there's a lot of ways to deal 3 damage to cards. There's not a ton of ways to deal 4 damage. So I think that'll make this card at least playable, but I still don't think that Mono Noxus is really going to be a deck, or even a heavy Noxus deck. It really needs to utilize another region to be good. So helpful, but probably won't see any play. This one I thought was pretty cool. Captain Ferran. or old Captain Decimate. It used to transform all cards in your hand into decimates, but now when it's summoned, you just create 3 decimates in hand. And I think this card was already pretty powerful, and we talked about it on stream a couple times. But this card was pretty powerful, it just never found a place. And this is making even a like control Demacia decks feel pretty, like this is just a huge finisher. And even in like discard, like PNZ Noxus or something like that, this gives you cards to discard or burn damage, so that's extra reach and free discards that you're generating. You're going positive in cards in hand, so the other thing too is that you don't, at this point in the game, a lot of the Noxus just ran out of cards, and it was nice to be like, oh, say you got left with some 1-drops or something like that, they transform into more usable cards, and then this card could, you know, potentially be good. It's an 8/8 Overwhelm, good finisher, but now it just creates the 3 decimates. So 8/8 Overwhelm, guaranteed 3 decimates, don't have to sacrifice any of the already existing burn in your hand. I think this card might be an actual playable card now. Maybe we'll see it in a more controlling Noxus deck though, because this is a win con on 1 card. And as I was talking about before, of how like Ladros and cards of that nature have just defined what the late game metagame looks like. You need cards that when they come and play, they're winning you the game. They cannot sit around and, you know, wait too long to kill you. This is like 8/8 Overwhelm that turn, and then the following turn, I'm going to just blast you with decimates. Like, this puts your opponent on a very quick clock. So I like the direction that they went with Captain Fron, and I'm hoping that this card will see some play now. Aurora Borealis has gone from a 7 mana to a 6 mana card. I mean, there's not much to be said. This card is just trash still. I mean, this is just create 2 random Poros and 2 Poro snacks. This creates 8 mana worth of cards that you're still going to have to activate afterwards on a 6 mana card that doesn't give you any tempo. This is not like making Poros playable, but certainly needed to be better than what it was. This card was 100% unplayable before, and well, honestly, now it's still 100% unplayable. This card's just trash. There's nothing really to be said about it. Poros are just not going to be a better deck because of this. This, on the other hand, though, I think Poro Herder, this is a really nice change. If Poro Herder used to cost 4 mana, now it's 2 mana, and it's a 2/3 that says when I'm summoned, you draw a Poro if you have a Poro ally. So they kind of cut the card in half, but I think it makes this card a lot more playable, as this is a 2 mana 2/3, which is a good stat line for a 2-drop with a bonus effect to draw a card. And even though it's draw a Poro, it's still draw a card, and it fits perfectly into the curve, and that's exactly what they said, is they wanted to have more on-curve options for Poros. So it didn't feel like a deck like that had to sit around for too long. So now you could curve something like play a Poro on 1, play Poro Herder on 2, maybe play a Poro Snacks on 3, or, you know, play some more Poros or something like that. And then like even Braum on 4, like Braum summons the Mighty Poro on the front side now. So maybe that would help the Poro deck out a bit. I don't think it's going to be, you know, S tier or probably even tier 1, but it's a step in the right direction. Unlike this is not helping this deck. This is still just a terrible card. She Who Wanders, or as you know, some of you OGs might know her as She Who Wins. This card used to have Regenerate, and they took it off because it was too powerful, but now, as I've said before about how the late game metagame is of the cards have to just win the game when they come and play, this card, the problem with it is that it doesn't do that, and the other late game strategies, because if you play a late game strategy that doesn't win the game instantly once it gets to that condition that it's trying to fulfill, the other control decks will. So when you play like any kind of control mirror, it's like the one that just has the way to instantly win the game is always going to be favored, and usually they're better against the more aggressive decks anyways, because they don't have to sit around and wait for your opponent to potentially climb back into the game. They just kill you if they get it to their win condition. And I don't think She Who Wanders is going to come back in. They Who Endure, everybody wanted to see this card nerfed, and honestly, I don't think this one was enough. I just still think that this card's broken in the decks that it's played in. This helps. It's definitely a step in the right direction, that it can't come down on turn 6 anymore, and it feels like more of a late game threat in line with what the other ones are doing, or what the other high costed cards in this game are doing. The fact that this card can unlimited scale, I think, is a problem, and I think a lot of people in the community said that capping this card's health would be a good way to limit this card's power level, or get rid of the overwhelm and, you know, let it just go to infinity, but like it can't just outright kill your opponent. It's just like an unlimited value stick, which would probably make the card a little too weak. I was a fan of the just limit the health options, so that when it comes down, it's not just an unstoppable overwhelm for the most part, and then combined with atrocity is, you know, it's just a little too much. We'll see, though, how this deck pans out. There's another nerf with the Cursed Abomination that will probably help out with the more unfair sides of that deck and pushing this a turn back. I think we'll do enough for it, but it'll still be a strong deck. Ren Shadowblade, complete rework. This card used to be an 8 mana 6/4 that gave enemy units ephemeral, but now this card is just a 3/3 with quick attack for 4 that creates a Shadow Fiend every time it strikes, which combined with quick attack is going to generate it every time this card attacks. I think that's pretty solid, honestly. Like, it's not like a terrible effect. I don't really know where this is going to fit in to see play. Maybe in an ephemeral strategy, but even in an ephemeral strategy, I think this might be a little too costly. But the fact that it can strike either on the attack or the block and then get you that Shadow Fiend might be like a pretty decent card. Maybe even in more controlling decks I could see this. This is just a pretty good value card of like 3/3 quick attack that guaranteed draws like a card to do something that can either push for damage or block or, you know, something. So I think this is like a playable card, but I don't really know where this fits in. I'm a little unsure of that. We'll see though. Time will tell. Maybe somebody will find a good way to use Ren Shadow Blade. Jay Medarda. Now, we talked about this card having a build-around style effect. It used to be an 8-mana 6/6 with Elusive with the same effect of when I'm targeted and survive, which they just didn't clarify before, but it did have to survive, draw a card. Because it costed 8 mana, this build-around effect was completely useless because it was way too late in the game for that card to ever work. Maybe we'll see it now that it costs 6 mana and it's a 4/4, that this build-around might actually work out now that it's a bit less mana. I'm assuming that 6 mana for this effect, though, is still probably a little too much. And as I said before, with late game strategies, they kind of just have to win the game on the spot or they're usually not good. And if it takes a little too long to get the ball rolling, you got to win with all those cards you draw. Maybe if you're just burning your opponent out for something, but I don't see it. I don't think, like, you Sumpworks map this card and buff it a bunch or something. I don't know. Maybe somebody finds a deck with it. There's something cool you can probably do with it, but I don't think it'll ever be a competitive deck. This is a huge one for competitive play. Escaped Abomination has gone from a 4 health to a 3 health, making it so that it can actually be answered on curve. Cursed Keeper plus Ravenous Butcher and Cursed Keeper plus Bladed Caretaker were way too broken before, and now there's actually, like, the unstoppable part of it is there's 4 health, so at that stage of the game, when you declared an attack, with the Escaped Abomination, there's no value trade. There's like no possibility of your opponent killing it. Thermogenic Beam on 2 doesn't kill the card, and a lot of times Thermogenic Beam on 3 would even have to just be played for like an overcosted version unless your curve worked perfectly, and then it's still just too slow to be dealing with a curve like that. So now most 2-drops, actually, there's a lot of ways that you can answer this with just units and not just feel like there's a card on the board that's guaranteed getting 2-for-1 at that stage of the game. So I think that'll do a lot to slow down the early game of the They Who Endure deck of just 3/2s in general and three mana cards that have 3 attack can just block this Abomination and get it off the board, so it doesn't get a prolonged value of multiple attacks or a block and an attack that just made it a little too hard to get through that early game. There just wasn't a whole lot of counterplay, so we'll see with that moving forward. But I think between this and the They Who Endure mana cost increase, that deck will definitely still be good, but like much worse and much more manageable. It won't feel as unfair as before. The Harrowing has gone from 10 to 9. Not much to be said about this. I mean, it's just better and a little easier to pull off the strategy. We might be seeing some Harrowing decks, but this fell out of favor just because it costs too much. Deny, it doesn't work out, or in general of just sometimes it doesn't guarantee winning the game. Maybe we'll see like an Ash Rekindler strategy again. I used to love that deck in beta, but we'll see where this goes. The Harrowing probably doesn't do a ton for the card, but it's better. It's definitely better, so maybe we'll see people trying to splash it in again and see how it works out. Definitely a very powerful card. I'm not sure it even needed the buff. I think that it still feels like roughly the same card. And it's a card that you probably don't want to buff too much because this card could easily get out of hand. But Deny keeps it in check automatically, and even like cards like Ruination sometimes and other board managing cards. But we'll see. We'll see where this card goes. Dredgers. So Dredgers was not really overpowered, but this was definitely the best start that you could have in the deep deck. This is the only thing that they did to touch the deep deck, which I don't feel it was too powerful of a deck. It was just a strong one. They wanted to make the deep deck more on theme with what it was supposed to do, and I do kind of agree with that. It was kind of weird when the best way to beat, we play Heimerdinger a lot on stream, and we play against the deep deck, and it's usually just a free win, but they can still curve out really aggressively. And it's kind of odd to just see it of like them curving into like multiple dredgers, and then the 3-drop options they have of the Debloom Wanderer and the Jaw Hunters. It's like those were the scariest curves, which is kind of weird to think about of a deck that's supposed to go super slow, had a really strong way to curve in the early game that sometimes was just more important than the late game of just when you curve that really early game, you guaranteed get to the late game and you're applying a lot of pressure for a deck that probably shouldn't be. I don't think this nerf was really warranted, but I do agree that they were trying to put it more in line with what the strategy was intending to do, and it just felt a little off that this card had 2/1 stats and could, give you a good curve and be able to like beat down your opponent a little bit in the early game on top of the toss 3 mechanic. So if you think about it in comparison to like Jettison's toss 4 for 1, this card was toss 3, but you also got a 2/1. The value was like there's no comparison. This card was infinitely better for the most part. Mind Meld, this card was just kind of like a trashy combo card that's just cheesing your opponent, and it wasn't really good enough, so they figured the same thing with Harrowing. Maybe we go from 8 to 7 and it makes the strategies a little more viable. You can get them out of turn earlier, like you could, or just a little less mana to maybe make it easier to do something else in the turn that you're playing it. This is just like Harrowing, very powerful card. It's just those types of strategies are just not very good in Runeterra because of cards like Deny and Responses and general. Just like you can't be like dunking all of that mana into a big play that doesn't guaranteed win you the game. So we'll see about that. Petty Officer, 1 health to 2 health. Yeah, I mean, it's just better, objectively better. I think this card should see a lot more play now. It's like one of the big punishes is just like too many ways to deal 1 damage to a board, so when you summon a 1-drop. This card's going to be really strong, though. I think there's going to be a lot more aggressive strategies utilizing Petty Officer for the 1-cost follower. And everybody that wanted to see this, now the Yoink mechanic has now been coined. It's an actual term, nab is what it is, and it now draws from the bottom of the enemy deck instead. And that's really the only changes that they made. That's it. It just draws from the bottom of the deck now because they felt like they didn't want to hurt the buffing strategies for the top of the deck, as well as getting like the way it interacted with getting closer to like champions and things like that. And it clarifies non-champion card. But I really don't feel this was enough. Like, I still think that the card should be revealed. That was one of the most frustrating parts of his playing around cards from your own deck. It becomes very hard to have perfected gameplay. There's a little too much variance in what they could have taken from you, and still just the whole mechanic in general. As well as just the power level of these cards in general. Putting Merchant from 2 health to 1 health is the only nerf in general outside of the drawing from the bottom. This is a step in the right direction because this card shouldn't have been like as good as it was, just like overwhelmingly powerful for its mana cost. So at least this way it makes it a lot easier to answer, and it doesn't just sit on the board the whole game, so you can answer it with less investment cards like Vile Feast and Make It Rain now, which I do think will make a substantial difference in the gameplay of our surrounding merchants, so at least that they shouldn't be getting all of these cards at reduced mana cost. But Pilfered Goods and Royal Grifter are exactly the same. I think these cards are still ridiculous, and it's not going to change a lot. In the meta, I think these cards are like, they just didn't do enough to this mechanic. I would have just really wanted to see them make the cards revealed to eliminate one of the most frustrating parts of it, but we'll see how it goes moving forward. I imagine it won't be enough, but you never know. Riptide Rex and Heimerdinger managed to dodge the nerfs entirely, and those are definitely the two most surprising to me. How did Heimerdinger not get nerfed? That deck is so powerful. So that's my big takeaway from all this is Braum decks might become playable. Maybe. Probably not. But like they'll be good decks at least. Heimerdinger has to be the best deck now. I don't see how it's not. They didn't do enough to the nab mechanic. I don't think, and these cards will still be very annoying and powerful. But at least it's a step in the right direction with this being at 1 HP. Riptide Rex is still absurd. But maybe they felt that this was enough of a nerf to Bilgewater. But like that Bilgewater, I mean, this card's a lot better now. So like Bilgewater got a bit of a buff there. They Who Endure got a lot worse, making Heimerdinger even better. Also, on top of the fact that it didn't get hit, one of the most challenging parts for Heimerdinger was the early game of just not being able to answer the 4/4 effectively. So it would run you down a little too fast before you could set up, and then also the They Who Endure coming out a turn later. So definitely know that the boys at Meta World Gaming are going to be on the forefront of the Heimerdinger metagame, as we've always been. And we're going to be playing a lot more. I don't think there's any reason not to. That deck is still just ridiculous. So you'll be seeing some Heimerdinger videos coming out with updated deck lists, probably some more gameplay in the new meta. But we're also going to be trying to brew some new things. The format might shift. We might see counter queues for Heimerdinger. Like Burn might become more prevalent if Heimerdinger is just going to be the #1 deck. And then maybe we find ourselves in a triangle meta where there's something that people play like the counter the Burn decks that lose to the Heimerdinger decks, and the Burn decks beat the Heimerdinger decks. So maybe we'll see it moving a little more towards that. We'll see how the format shapes up. New boards, whatever. This Cat Guardian chasing a laser, adorable. Pretty cool. These card backs are pretty sweet. I'm a pretty big fan of the card backs, just the champion card backs. New emotes, as always. I love when new emotes come out. But I gotta say, all these ones are pretty weak. Pretty weak compared to our previous ones. Bundles coming out as well. 1,332 coin bundle for Lee Sin's board, the sleeve, and the exclusive icon. So it's cool seeing bundles and stuff like this coming out. I like that they want to lower the cost of certain things like that, but whatever. I'm not too interested in that. Yeah, maybe we'll see what they are moving forward. Expedition updates, sure. There is something to note in the bug fixes that also is, ironically, a Heimerdinger buff, essentially. So before, Vi would have sometimes is incorrect. It was all the time. 100% of the time it worked this way. Vi would not have the appropriate buffs when copied by Dawn and Dusk. or Dusk and Dawn. I thought it was Dawn and Dusk. Yeah, so when you play Dawn and Dusk on a 10 attack Vi, the other ones would summon at 2/4s, and we were assuming that that was intentional, even though it didn't make any sense because it happened every time. It wasn't like something that happens sometimes. But now Dawn and Dusk is a card that often pops out of Flash of Brilliance in the Heimerdinger deck and now works on the best target in the deck, which is a 10 attack Vi. So that's pretty amazing that that works like that, and it's just like small buff, you know, but it is technically like it does strengthen the Heimerdinger deck a little bit and make one of your outcomes for Flash a bit better, which it didn't need. The other decks got nerfed, Heimerdinger didn't, and then they fixed a bug that was like just gives Heimerdinger a small buff. So that's a bit ridiculous, I would say. And yeah, that's it from us for today, guys. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe. Check out our new decks when they come out. Keep up on Mobalytics. Link to the Discord and the Twitch, everything down in the description below. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you later.